Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today we have two very interesting guests, and I will say coming from very different but very similar perspectives at the same time. We're going to be talking today about the C-Suite's most overlooked playbook for creating growth. And that's a big statement to make, the most overlooked. But I think by the time we get to the end of the conversation, we'll have made the point pretty clear. Jereme Baker, you are the CEO of the Baker Law Group, grew it from one person, you, and one client to where you are today. I'll let you explain a little bit where you are today in a minute. You mentioned to me earlier that it was important for you as you were growing the business and expanding in the business world that you become the best version of yourself, you and your employees. And that takes incremental changes. And I just love that philosophy, and we're going to hear a lot more about it today. Mo, you are a serial entrepreneur. I think you said at one point that you've been trying to create the business that you wanted to work in, right? And how you instigate change inside of businesses. And you've been doing that across businesses. And you've got one that you've just launched that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. In fact, maybe I'll turn it over to you to start. And if you could, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm really honored to be having this conversation with you, Jereme, as well. So I'm Mo Berkner Boyt, and we just announced C2IQ yesterday, where we are measuring the really uniquely human skills that we need in the age of AI. Steve, I've spent my career really thinking about how do we solve for creating workplaces where everyone can thrive. I'm a serial entrepreneur because I'm really willing to let go of the how and very focused on the why. So I'm always kind of looking around the corners for what are the issues that are coming up for workforces? What does work look like today? What's it going to look like in the future? And how can we solve for the human potential equation in that and making sure that everyone is bringing their full potential to the table? It's been fun.
I believe it. I can see it in your face. I can see you love what you do. I love it. So, Jereme, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit more on your background.
Yeah, certainly. It's great to be on this podcast with both you, Steve, and Maureen. Happy to be here and excited about what we're talking about. As you mentioned, Steve, I started my practice. It's just me, right? I was wearing all the hats. And, one of our core values of the firm is really being the best version of yourself, right? Whether you're a paralegal or an attorney, right? We want you to be the best paralegal you can be, the best attorney you can be, but we also want you to be the best father, the best spouse, the best son, daughter, right? All aspects of life. We want you to be your best version. And we really want to attract people to our firm that are committed to that goal. And the other aspect of that, which really ties into that, as you alluded to, Steve, is that incremental improvement every day. We want to get better every day. We want our firm to be better. We want to be a better practicing attorney. We want to be a better father, right? All of those aspects, and focusing on it every day and looking for ways to improve. And hopefully as time goes on, we can look back at all the impact that we've had on others, including our clients, our coworkers, and be proud of what we've accomplished if we continue that incremental improvement.
Well, we're going to take these philosophies and we're going to unpack it here in a big way. And I'm going to start out, Jereme, you were on the floor. I'm going to ask you the first question, if you don't mind. And I'm going to use a big word to start out, people business paradox. What that means, right? But you've been in the middle of scaling your business. And if you don't mind telling us how many employees you have now when you start to answer, because that makes you an expert in scaling businesses. But I'd love to have you explain what you think the people business paradox is when you're scaling businesses.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started, it's been about 15 years or so. 2011 is when I started the firm. We're now at about 60 people, including independent contractors. So we've had a lot of growth, and a lot of that has really accelerated in the past few years. As far as the people paradox, it's funny, just this week was talking to a doctor at an event, and I asked him, what's one of the biggest challenges your business is currently facing? And the first thing he said, well, you mean other than staffing? So, no one can escape that, right? And especially when you're in a services-based business like we are, as far as being lawyers, lawyers, our doctors, especially. I mean, it affects every business, of course, whether you're building widgets, but especially I think in the services business. So some of the challenges is that, not only do we have a marketing department, we have a sales department, we have an accounting department, a collections department, right? Just like any other business. But the product that we sell is the service that we deliver, right? It's done by a human, right? In the case of the medical doctor I was talking to, the client comes into the office to get the service. Our lawyers, they go to court. They are arguing or making arguments or advocating for their clients in front of a judge or a jury. If they're negotiating a settlement or trying to strike a deal, they're negotiating that with another person, another attorney, right? So we're talking to our clients on a daily basis. So kind of counterpose that to, I've got a cell phone, right? I've had this cell phone for about 5 years. I'm not one to get the latest and greatest model, although I think I'm due for a new model, but I've had this cell phone for 5 years. How many times have I talked to Apple in those 5 years? Well, I've probably talked to someone once or twice, but it probably wasn't Apple. It was probably T-Mobile, right? In 5 years. So that's, I think, is some of the difference between, our business and more of a products-based business. Although we all face this sort of people paradox is how do we get the right people into our company? How do we train them, retain them, right? And make sure they fit into our culture. We continue to grow our culture when we're so heavily reliant, right, on our people. And so that's the challenge. In addition to that, I would say our revenue generation, right, is directly tied to our people as well. So if we have an attorney that's out sick, attorney that quits, or attorney that we have to let go, that revenue impact is felt immediately that day, right? So it's pervasive as far as how reliant we are on our people, and it's why it's so important that we have great people on our staff, but that we also are creating that culture to retain them and to allow them to be their best version, right? To continue to get better, to improve. So that's critical, but it is a big challenge for sure.
Well, Mo, before I give you a chance to enter in on this, I just wanted to accentuate the point of, and you had said in the past, we're in a people business. We're all in a people business. And in fact, I had the privilege of hosting a podcast with a chief people officer that had a PhD, and he did his thesis and proved what we all know, which is better engaged, more engaged employees translates to higher engaged customers, which translates into increased retention and revenue. So focusing on our employees, and like you said at the beginning, to be their best self, not just their best self at the office on the job, but in general. And I'd love to turn over to you because I can see the ideas that you're wanting to extol here. What's your thoughts on all this?
Well, it wasn't just the one person that you interviewed, Steve, there's so much data out there. Ignore it at your peril in terms of if you want to succeed in business, if you want to grow, if you want to be profitable, you have to center it around the humans because it is truly, and it is this tension. It's always interesting to me, having done this work for so long, that there are so many leaders that say, yeah, that's an afterthought, right? Like we'll do that. We'll work on culture or we'll work on the leadership skills or we'll work on all these things, but we got to make the donuts, right? It's like, well, actually, if you want to make the donuts really well, you got to focus on the people first. And when you focus on the people first, guess what? You can't hide anymore what your culture is like. People are leaving, they're talking about your business, they're right, whether it is a Reddit thread or Indeed, so you're going to attract and retain the best talent when you focus on this. So this paradox of we got to find the right people, you'll be able to find the right people if you have a culture where people can thrive.
So that's a point that very few people think about. They think about a company culture as once people are here, they want to stay, right? But people are interviewing us as businesses as much as we're interviewing them.
If you're having trouble, it's because people have already looked, seen who you are, and they're like, absolutely not. Great, they have an opening, but no thanks. right? I've got this one life to live. I'm not going to go work at someplace that feels like going to the rock pile every day.
Now, Jeremy, I'd love to get your point of view on culture, and I'm going to ask you to put a number on it. I'm going to ask on a scale of 1 to 10 how important culture is to growing long-term sustainable growth for your business. 1, it's not important at all. Could care less, right? 10, it's vital to our long-term sustainable growth of the business. Like, where would you put it and why?
Well, it has to be a 10, right? I mean, it is vital. And as I mentioned, the people are the lifeblood, right, of our company. It's literally, we can't do anything without them, right? We can't provide legal services. The way we're structured, like most companies, we can't bring on a new client, right? I mean, I used to be the one to do all those things, right? I brought on the client, I did the legal work, right? But as we scale and as we grow, I'm not the one doing those things anymore. And it is people doing all of those things, from the initial marketing, right, to try to get a client to even call. It's done by a person, through sales and intake, all the way through performance of the services. And then, when we complete those services, telling the client thank you, right? That's all done by humans. So it's vital. And then the culture piece, right, is because, especially with our firm, right, I think with any firm, even to maintain where you are, you have to have a good culture. Otherwise, people will leave. But I think it's especially important in a company like ours that is looking to grow and has been growing, right? Because not only are you looking to retain the people that you have, but you're looking to continually add new folks. And if you have a caustic culture, if you don't have a good culture where people want to spend, the majority of their waking day, right, every day or 5 days a week, whatever it is, then they're going to leave, right? It's not just about the paycheck. It's not just about the money. If it is, then they're going to hop and leave as soon as someone offers them an extra, $5,000 or whatever it is, right? You have to give them a reason to want to stay, and it can't just be about the money or the status, whatever it might be. It has to be about the culture.
So there's an interesting aspect of culture that doesn't get talked about a lot. Culture is one of those buzzwords, right? That does get talked about a lot, but culture can be one of those things where, well, we've got our values on that plaque on the wall over there. We've got a mission statement, but we know it's so much more than that. But you have an expertise, Bo, in change management and resilience. And one of the things that we know, especially for a scaling business, that means that business is changing constantly. Our clients are changing constantly. Their needs are changing constantly. Trends in the market are changing constantly. We get COVID thrown at us, right? We get AI thrown at us. Like, we're going to launch into a new territory, a new practice area. I mean, there is constant change. How does that impact the culture? But then what we need to do to be leaders that are promoting a company in a culture that is as resilient to that and as prosperous within that as we can.
Yeah. So I'm pretty big on data and really understanding kind of what is the baseline that we're living in. And I appreciate that you mentioned COVID, Steve, because when we look at the pace of change and what's happened with the pace of change, even since 2019 through today, it is accelerating at astronomical rates. You mentioned AI, right? What AI has done just in the last 18 months. So typically organizations from 2019, they were planning about 2 organized changes a year. That's up to 10 today. So when we're looking at, and you gave great examples for Jeremy's business, right? If he wants to get into a new market, if he wants to maybe acquire a smaller firm, any of those things, right? So we have this accelerated pace of change. We also have people that are extraordinarily burned out. We're only built for so much. So 71% of employees are feeling overwhelmed by the pace of change. Only 43% of them feel like they will support change, and 66% of employees are burned out, right? So we have burned out people, we have an accelerating pace of change, we have these expectations. Oh, here's 5 new AI tools that we want to use for any number of things. And so we are in a moment in time that this baseline is only going to get worse, quite frankly. So change management is about a process. Change resilience is about a skill set. And so if we want to have these cultures where people can come and become the best version of themselves, right, and continue to have incremental change, we really need to address change resilience skills, and we need to address human connection skills, because those two things, it doesn't matter your industry, it doesn't matter your organization size, those skills are critically important for your people to be able to show up and deliver great business results, quite frankly.
How does this ring for you and your business and what Mo's saying here?
I agree with what Maureen's saying. I think, one thing I'll add to that, right, which I do think is important, it is that mindset, right? So it has to be part of your culture. Like I mentioned, incremental improvement, right? So that's part of our mindset. That's part of our values. That's what we share with our staff, right? It's what we share when we're bringing on someone to add to our team, right? That this is who we are and this is what we're about. We're about getting better and improving. So there is the concept that we are going to be changing, right? We're not going to be staying the same. Now, at the same time, I think you have to do that in a responsible way. You can't overload. You can't throw too much change at anyone. It's just not going to work. And I've made that mistake once or twice, at a time, where let's do all this stuff, all at once. And not only do you get this kind of confusion, okay, well, which one do I do first, right? What's most important? But you could get that sort of burnout. So I've had to adjust and say, okay, well, yes, our mindset and the people that we want to attract, because you bring someone on board and they don't want to change, they don't want to improve, they don't want to get better, then it's not going to be a good cultural fit, right? They have to be committed to that. You can't make them be committed to that. So you just don't want to bring that person on board. So in your recruiting process, you want to make sure you've got that buy-in from day one, right before they even start, and that it's a good fit from that perspective. But then also you have to manage that change and that improvement. And you also have to continue to reinforce it, right? So it's that mindset. We're coming to work. We're thinking about ways we can improve and get better. Not that it's the main number one focus of what we're doing, right? But there's less resistance to that change when you have that as part of your culture.
So you talked before about kind of the neuroscience behind this. I'd love to get a little bit of, I love your data focus. And I love those stats, like 2/3 of people are burned out. I'm like, oh my goodness. Because we all know if we don't have high performance teams, we don't have a business, right? And if 2/3 are burned out, that's a problem. But take us through the neuroscience.
Yeah. So this is where I'm such a dork about this stuff. And it's so fascinating once you understand it. So there's both the neuroscience of connection, and then there's the neuroscience of change. So I'll start with the neuroscience of connection. So as human beings, we are biologically wired to need human connection. So this goes all the way back to when we first stood up on 2 feet. If we were alone, right? If I was not part of a group or a tribe, it means I would die, right? I needed to be accepted into the cave, right? If I was out on the plains alone, I couldn't survive, right? The saber-toothed tiger would get me, something would get me. We like to think we're these higher order beings now. We're not. That neurology has not changed. And so Abe Maslow almost had it right, his pyramid of needs. He actually had belonging up, and I think were he alive today with the neuroscans and the things that he could see, he would understand we see belonging as a safety need. So if I'm coming into work, I need to feel like I belong. If I don't, here's what happens. If something happens to me where I feel like I am not a part of the team, or somebody has done, whether usually it's unintentionally, I go into amygdala hijack, right? I go into fight or flight. My IQ drops. I am literally trying to figure out, I'm not thinking about what case I might be working on if I'm Jereme, right? I might not be thinking about the billable hours. I am into my lizard brain. What do I do to be safe again to make so I belong? So when we're talking about cultures of connection, when we're talking about teamwork, when we're talking about belonging and fit and all of that, it's a biological, neurological need. It is not warm and fuzzy at all, right? If you want high performance, you figure out that piece of it. The other piece, when we're talking about change, is we spend about half our life in habit, right? So if you think about a time that you showed up in a parking lot somewhere and you don't remember the drive, or in the morning you're standing in your kitchen with a cup of coffee and you don't remember brushing your teeth, you don't remember choosing your clothes, you don't remember any of that, right? We're in habit. Why are we doing that? Although our brain only takes up a very small percent of our body mass, it consumes the lion's share of oxygen. So we stay in habit loops so that we're protecting our brain so it can be working on the important things, not what socks am I going to wear today, but what do I need to do in this legal brief? When we have a high rate of change, think about the last time, I don't know, whatever email provider you use changed their layout. And suddenly you're having to think about what's the send? How do I change my signature? Right. And you're out of habit. And so you're spending oxygen, you're spending on something that is not higher order thinking, right? It is whatever that change has tossed in front of me. And I think what's interesting, Jereme, I loved what you were saying, like you've made the mistake of too much change at once. Wouldn't it be great if we could put our employees in a bubble and they weren't also experiencing external change? Because it's not just the change that's happening in our organizations, it's also the change that's happening out in the world, right? So what's happening in their life. So suddenly we want to be in habit, but we can't because there's this change happening. So we're having to think about all of these things that we normally wouldn't think about. And so we need to allow people understand what's the skill set where they can be really good at circling through that change quickly, right? So that they can get back into habit on the mundane.
Here's what, so, hey, by the way, I have a son that has an overactive amygdala, so I got that analogy big time. But here's what this makes me want to do. After hearing Jereme, you talk about, culture's a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, and everything you're saying here, I'm like, I got to have a chief culture officer now. I got to have a chief change officer. Like, I got to elevate this to a C-suite level because it has such a profound impact on my business. Typically, HR has kind of been the department that is, I wouldn't say in charge of culture, right? But they're the ones that are thinking about it the most and who we usually turn to and rely on. But most HR leaders, and I've talked to a ton, I run an entire podcast just for HR professionals. They have imposter syndrome. They have a terrible time struggling to get a seat at the table. They are looked upon as a support department. They are not what we just described here in terms of the agents that are going to help us make these changes internally. So, Jereme, I'd love to just know your perspective on the importance of the HR function and should they have a seat at the table?
No, I think it's certainly critically important, right? Because as you mentioned, they're typically the ones in a typical organization that are looked to, as you mentioned, to kind of have a pulse on the people, right? Whether that's fair or not, or if that's always the case, but that's the kind of perception of that. And I think just one of the things we have to keep in perspective is the growing business. And again, I can kind of talk back to my experience, right? Again, once upon a time, doesn't seem that long ago, I was the HR, I was the CEO, the COO, right? The attorney, all of those things. And so we have to also keep in mind these companies that are going through that growth from, we don't have an HR department, right? We don't have a COO even, right? You're kind of trying to prioritize those things, right? As you grow, like, okay, do we need an HR person? Is this the time? Is it in our budget, right? Can we afford that? We made that change last year, right? We were able to say, hey, we know we need it, but we're finally at a place that we can invest in it, right? Because it is an investment in the company and in your people. And that, we have a meeting every week, right, with our HR person, and we go over kind of the pulse of things, right? Again, it allows me to maybe it's critically important in my mind too, right? The culture. But I can delegate some of those duties now, and we can make it better, right? Because quite frankly, you can only do so much, right? kind of what we're talking about a little bit here too. But now we have an HR department. We have someone who's really investing more time into that. And so it's been a big benefit to us. They absolutely should have a seat at the table because, again, it's critical to retaining, getting the best out of your employees, right? Getting the best version of themselves, having a pulse on that, right? Because that's a difficult thing. Not everybody's running up to me telling me about what challenges and issues they're having. In fact, I'm often the last person that they want to talk to about those things. So it's really important that communication is happening and there's a space for them to do that. But then that information is getting to the rest of the C-suite, right? The rest of management. So we understand, okay, these are some of the challenges that we're facing and how do we improve? How do we make, the situation better, whether it's our culture or just helping that person. So that communication, having that seat at the table, I think a big part of that is just simply the communication that happens when they are at the table, getting that information, and then we can look to make and continue to make improvements. If they're not at the table, you're missing a big piece there.
I know that, Mo, part of what you're going to say is that leadership themselves has a huge role in all of this, right? But what's your point of view on HR and needing to have them have a seat at the table and why?
Yeah, I think, and I would say all of this is an and. I don't think it's an either or, right? When you were talking about we need a chief people officer, an HR officer, and you need particularly your frontline managers and every individual contributor, because culture is how actually things get done. And that's through the people. But there has to be somebody that is strategically thinking about people having the capacity to do that. I think most HR folks don't have a seat at the table because they're compliance based. They came up through how are we keeping, what are our payroll policies? Are we making sure we're onboarding, offboarding? Because that takes a lot of work, right? To stay on the right side of the law. The great news right now, I would say one of the positives from AI disruption is a lot of that kind of rote, mundane policy that can be done with AI now. And if you want somebody to have the seat at the table, make sure that that person really understands that they are profit and loss driven. They know the numbers, they understand the strategy, and they're looking and saying, do we have the human capacity today to deliver on this strategy? And what do I need to be thinking about? What do we need to be thinking about 5 years from now? But actually, 5 is a little long, maybe 3 years from now. What capacity, what skills, the human talent that we have, what do we need to be doing to be ready for what we have in our strategy versus compliance?
Here's what I'm hearing throughout all of this. A big takeaway is that if managed correctly under the right culture, the right opportunity to be your best self, resilient to change, that our people are our greatest competitive advantage. And because, from the dawn of time, it was our product and our service and our prices. That's the way competitive advantage was determined. Jereme, I would love to hear your perspective on what you think one of the biggest competitive advantages is for your business. And does it come down to the people?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it comes down to the people. I mean, it's such a massive difference. You can see it. I mean, I see it in every facet of our business. It could be in the delivery of legal services. When you have a great employee, right? Someone who interacts and manages the client relationship really well versus someone who avoids it almost, right? Who wants to avoid that client interaction. Everything works better, right? When you have that employee that is well-rounded employee, they're client facing, they can do good legal work, but at the same time, they have a great relationship with their clients, right? It creates less issues, right? You retain your clients longer, clients are happier, they're not calling and complaining about their bill as much, right? Because they know what's going on with their case. They're not just getting an invoice because their client attorney's communicating with them. But, same thing in every other facet, right? If you have a top performer, it's going to make everything else easier and make everything else work. If you don't have a top performer, everything else, 99% of the rest of the business is amazing, but that one poor performer is hurting the business, right? Is preventing the business from really performing at its best. And that's really how delicate I find it to be, right? And that's why it's so critical to have again, recruit the right people, understand what your business needs are, recruit the right people, train them, retain them. It's critical in every facet of it. And it can give you an advantage, to your point, right? As far as a competitive advantage, you have great people, you're generally going to have a great business, and you're going to be better than the competition. Now, I think as we kind of talked a little bit about AI, right? And again, kind of the concept that we have is thinking about ways that we can get better and we can improve. Well, tell me some of the things that you aren't getting to, right? That you really want to get to those tasks or to get to that project and complete that project, but you're not able to. Well, what's interfering with that? Is there something that we can offload? That kind of has always been there's the delegation concept, right? So, you're a top manager. Is there someone you can delegate? Are you a good delegator? Now it's incorporating that AI component. Technology's already always been there, right? AI is just kind of a rapid growth and acceleration of technology and the way that every company has always used it to a certain extent, but now it's even more critical. So it's really trying to get and think about how can we use AI in such a way to offload some of those tasks so that you now have the time to get to those higher level projects that we're not getting to, because everybody at every company, every CEO can think about all these things that they want to get to, right? And we just can't get there because we don't have the resources. It comes down to, well, if we had an unlimited budget, of course we could, but no one has that. So you're trying to think in this AI age, what can we offload so we can get to some of these higher level tasks? It's not, to me, about replacing employees, right? It's about getting them to perform some higher level functions and eliminating some of those more mundane routine tasks. And if we do that, if we can marry the two, right, top performers, great employees, with this getting better, improving every day, implementing AI, then that's, I think, where our competitive advantage is.
Yeah, if people is a competitive advantage, getting them, we all have those proactive things that we want to get to every day and we never get to. So if we can take our biggest asset, our biggest competitive advantage, and make them more productive, they're going to love it too, because we all get frustrated by not getting to those things on our list. Well, what's your thought on people as competitive advantage?
I mean, that's what this whole conversation's been about, right? Like, I could go and I can find legal services. There are thousands of firms that I can go to, whether it's a one-off shop or whether I'm going to choose Baker Law because of the people, right? That's just hands down it. I'm coming to an attorney generally because things aren't going well, right? Maybe there's a happy thing happening, but so I'm also probably at one of my most vulnerable times. Something has gone wrong, or I'm having to think about dying, or I'm right, like all these things. I want to work with really exceptional human beings during that process, right? So I can choose, and I said this before, there's nowhere to hide. So I can go out and I can read all of the reviews. I can talk to people, right? If I'm going to work with Jereme's firm, I'm going to ask for some referrals so I can chat with people that I've worked with. That comes down to the humans that are delivering the service, right? And so it truly is. There isn't much new under the sun, product or service wise. Occasionally, there are some people that are in blue ocean, but more often than not, I'm choosing between people that offer very similar services or products, and I'm choosing based on who the humans are that I'll be working with.
I have to tell you a story that accentuates what both of you are saying right now. I was talking yesterday, did a podcast with one of our clients. They're a technology company and their number one channel partner. And the channel partner told the story that before these guys came in, they had a regime change. He said, they had the market leading product, but I was looking to get out of my contract because I didn't like the people I was working with. Right? To him, the market leading product wasn't the most important part.
No, there might have a couple little, if you're talking software, there might be a couple different features, or there might be, but I'm getting terrible customer service. And oh, by the way, if you're sending me to a bot and that bot is wrong, or I'm frustrated and I'm having to push, 3 trying to get to a human, the humans in the loop are so critically important. It's how we choose, right? We don't, again, I'm going to go back to that belonging piece, right? And feeling like, I don't want to be with jerks, even with my service providers, my vendors. I'm still looking for a sense of belonging with them, right? So the human connection is just cannot be overstated how critical it is.
Well, I have one last question that I want to ask both of you. And it tends to be the hardest question to answer. So I'm going to preface it that way right now. But our poor human brains, we can't remember more than about two or three things max at a time. So we've talked about a lot already. If there was one takeaway that you wanted the audience that's consuming this podcast right now to take away from our conversation, the most important thing, what would that be? And I'll let whoever wants to start first jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about it. I mean, we've kind of alluded to it a little bit before. It's kind of high level, but I think it's critical to what we're talking about here. And, it's one, understanding your business needs. And from there, the starting point, who do you have, right? I mean, it's the culture. Is your culture the way you want it to be? And if it's not, fix it, right? I mean, part of it too is, do the staff that you work with, do they know what your values are, right? If they don't, if you think they don't, I mean, you can send out a poll and find out if you think they do, or if you're not sure if they do. But make sure that they understand what the values are and that you are sharing that with them. And then make sure you are recruiting people that are in line with those values, right? Then you, again, train, you work on retention, you work on improving your processes, making it better. You invest in your people. I think that's the most critical component to this. And I think the one thing that I want to try to take away from this is it does, kind of start in with your people, but really just take a look at yourself, right? What are your company's needs? And do your people know your values? Do they know what you stand for? Because it's a lot easier to recruit when you know what they are and the rest of your team knows what they are. And then you can see if that person is going to fit into it.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that, Jereme. And I would say in all of this, hope is not a strategy. You actually need to be very intentional about this, right? You need to measure. You need to be very clear what skills are needed. You need to assess. You need to, Jereme, you alluded to, right? Do you need to do both kind of pulse surveys in terms of the culture? And then where do you have skills gaps, right? All of those things, and be forward focused. Here's where we are today. Where do we want to be? And what do we need to do from a P standpoint to get us there? Very, very strategically and proactively, not just, we hope this is all going well for us. And we feel like, nobody's really coming to us and saying things are bad. I'm going to go back to the stats. Only 43% are willing to support change, and 66% of employees are burned out. If you're not taking a hard look in the mirror, and if you're not assuming some of those people are in your organization, I've got some real estate to sell you on Mars. Right? So it's constant, right? You can't take your eye off this at any period of time. You should be looking at these numbers just like you're looking at your financials. Because if you're not, it's a high risk area. So thinking about your human risk, right? And what you're doing to mitigate human risk to unleash human potential.
I have to tell you, the mission behind this podcast is to bring different perspectives, different insights from all of our experiences so that we can help each other be a part of that rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think we were waves on that tide today that rarely get discussed in the way that we did. And, we have all kinds of growth plans. We have 3-year plans. I don't know if anybody has 5-year plans anymore, but we have plans, right? And I'm not sure what we were talking today, talk about lack of a seat at the table. Are these a part of our plans? Right. A very dedicated part of our plan. So I just wanted to say thank you for airing this and helping to educate us all on yet again, one more thing we have to put on the proactive list to make sure that we're taken care of. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I appreciate it, Steve and Maureen. This was great.
Yeah, same. It was an honor. Great to be here.